Well, joining me now to go over his report is the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Yves Giroux. Mr. Giroux, good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, likewise.
Let's start with what we heard, the comments today from the Environment Minister, Catherine McKenna. She says, look, I think she's essentially rejecting the findings in your report, saying that, you know, she will not have to raise carbon taxes after 2022, that the carbon tax rate that's being imposed now and that's been talked about, $50 a ton in 2022, that's where it'll stay. No intention to raise it. And that you haven't taken into account all the other measures the government is taking to reach its targets. What do you say to that? They say they're going to meet their Paris targets and they won't have to raise carbon tax.
Well, for one thing, I hope they're right, but I don't think they're right. So we have taken into account all the policies that have been either announced or are in place right now. So there are a couple of measures that are hard to quantify, and we asked Environment and Climate Change before drafting our reports if they have any estimates of the impacts of all these measures with respect to the reduction of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. And they've taken what we call a prudent approach by not estimating the direct impact on greenhouse gas emissions. We were not able to quantify the estimated impact on all these additional measures, and I'm not sure that will be sufficient to fill the gap there is between where the greenhouse gas emissions are scheduled to be in 2022 and where they need to be by 2030, which is about 79 million tons of CO2.
Yeah, she's talking about these measures, planting trees, curbing plastic pollution, which the government talked about this week, investments in clean technologies. You're saying you looked at all that, but that they haven't assigned emissions reductions to their own programs. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. And even if these measures were sufficient to meet the Paris targets, as you mentioned, subsidies, clean technology, planting trees, all these things cost something. So whether you do it solely through increasing the price of carbon emissions, or you do it through planting trees, millions of trees probably, and investing in clean tech, it also costs something. So the point of the report was not to say pricing carbon is the only way or is the best way.
In fact, you made a point of not passing judgment on it.
Exactly. So the point of the report was to illustrate how much it will cost at a minimum to meet the Paris targets. So whether it be through increasing prices on carbon emissions or planting millions and millions of trees, it will cost something.
All right, but to be clear, in your world of numbers, they're suggesting these proposals, these other things we're doing that are going to help us get to the targets, but we're not going to look at how much they're actually going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That doesn't seem like a credible way to say, here are the things we're doing, but we don't know what effect they'll have. You know.
Well, it amounts to saying, trust us. Well, I would love to trust people when they say that, but I don't think it's fair for Canadians to just say, trust us, we have a plan, we'll get there. They have a plan until 2022, and it's clear, but there's a void that we found between 2022 and 2030, which is the date by which Canada has committed to meet the Paris targets. So we looked at how much it costs to fill the void that the government has left.
Okay, so to be clear, in the information, and this we're speaking in real time here today, in the information you've seen, do you have any doubt they'll have to raise carbon taxes after 2022? And by the numbers you've said?
I have no doubt that the government will need to do something, and if they go just by raising carbon prices, they'll have to do about $52 a ton additional. If they do a mix of regulations and subsidies and planting trees, they'll have to do that, and they'll have to raise the price of carbon emissions by a smaller amount if they do all these things.
Right.
But still, I don't think all these measures will be sufficient to get us to where we need to be to meet the Paris targets.
Right now, the government exempts some sectors from the tax. Some of the big emitters have exemptions for competitive reasons and you know, competition with other foreign companies and so on. You're also saying in the report today, if what happens with the carbon tax is what you're saying happens with the carbon tax, it'll have to be spread across almost every sector, right? And so the ones that are getting a pass now, they'll no longer be able to get a pass if we want to reach the targets, right?
Well, that was for illustrative purposes. So we assumed every sector is covered except for agriculture. If the government, for whatever reason, chooses to exempt some sectors, that's fine, that's a policy choice. But it means that everybody else will have to pay more than 52 $52 per ton of carbon. So if you exempt, for example, I don't know, cement makers or whatever other sector of the economy, then their emissions are free. Everybody else has to pay more or has to make an additional effort to reduce their own emissions if we are, as a country, to meet the Paris targets.
We also heard today from the minister that the province of Alberta, people there, where they've canceled the carbon pricing plan that was in place, the government of Jason Kenney there, they're going to start paying the federal backstop starting January 1st. So they're part of this wider discussion. What will the impact be of the higher carbon tax regime you see possibly having to take place on consumers? What will we see?
Well, it will mean probably reshifting some consumption patterns. If we go with, as a country, with higher prices on higher prices on carbon emissions, then $52 per ton, in addition to the $50 that's already scheduled to be in place in the 4 provinces, soon to be 5 provinces, subject to the federal backstop, that means 23 cents per liter of gas in 2030, more than without pricing on carbon. So it means that people will have to make choices, either driving less, shifting to less carbon intensive fuels. So, or if people don't make these choices, they'll just have to pay more. But presumably some people, at least, will make choices to avoid paying the carbon pricing.
Okay. What's the potential impact on the overall Canadian economy if a federal government were to boost the price on carbon across all the provinces and territories, like you've said might have to be the case?
So that's a good question, and we looked at that as well. But before looking at that, we assumed that the government would maintain its current policy of returning the proceeds from carbon pricing to households so that the net revenue impact for the government would be neutral. So assuming that the government continues to do that, the impact on the economy would be a reduction of GDP of 0.35% in 2030. So not a big impact on the overall economy, but some sectoral impacts would probably be more significant.
All right. Parliamentary Budget Officer Yves Giroux. As always, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.